The monster from Earth and the doctor from Morith stood together on the precipice of history, prepared to risk everything for a world that had once feared one and now depended on both. Their journey had only just begun. The capital city of Morith rose before them like a monument to a dying civilization. Towering structures of advanced design now dulled by the perpetual gray haze that permeated the atmosphere. Military checkpoints dotted the approaches, a visible reminder of the martial law that now governed the planet's seat of power. Marcus and Valira observed from a concealed position in the outer industrial district, their transport hidden beneath a camouflage cover provided by Dr. Laris's team. They had traveled through the night, using routes known only to the independent scientists, avoiding both military patrols and insurgent territory. The communication array is there, Valira said, pointing to a central spire that rose above the surrounding buildings. It houses the planetary broadcast system. If we can access the main control room, we can transmit the formula to every scientific facility simultaneously. Marcus studied the city's defenses with the practiced eye of a survivor. Heavy security at all ground-level entrances. Aerial patrols every 15 minutes. This won't be like the research facility. These troops will be elite units, specifically trained for urban combat. Valira nodded grimly. General Mazik will have taken personal control of the capital's security. He knows we escaped, and he likely suspects our intentions. They had spent the previous day preparing at the Hydroponics Research Center. The scientists had refined the treatment formula to its most efficient form and loaded it onto multiple secure data devices. Redundancy in case one was lost or damaged. Meanwhile, Dr. Laris had gathered what intelligence she could about the capital's security measures. Now, as dawn approached, they prepared for what might be their final mission together. The access point Dr. Laris identified, Valira continued, checking a small holographic map. It's an emergency maintenance tunnel that connects to the city's subsurface transport network. If we can reach it undetected, it should take us within 200 meters of the communication array. Marcus nodded, memorizing the route. And once we're inside the array, I'll need approximately 10 minutes to access the system, authenticate with my research credentials, and upload the formula to the broadcast network. She hesitated, assuming my credentials haven't been revoked. And if they have, Valira's expression hardened with determination. Then we do it the hard way. I wasn't only a research scientist, I was head of my division. I know multiple override protocols. Marcus studied her face, seeing in it the same resolute courage that had first drawn him to her. No longer the cold scientist who had viewed him as a specimen, but a woman willing to risk everything for her world and the principle she believed in. "You've changed," he observed quietly. A small smile touched her lips. "Perhaps I've simply remembered who I really am." Her large eyes met his. "Or perhaps you changed me." Before he could respond, their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Both tensed, reaching for weapons, but relaxed slightly when they recognized the distinctive engine sound of the scientist's transport. Dr. Laris emerged, accompanied by two younger Morathians carrying equipment cases. "The latest security updates," she said without preamble, activating a portable display that showed real-time movement of military patrols. "They've increased perimeter sweeps, but there's a gap in coverage here." She pointed to a section of the industrial zone where a power distribution node is undergoing maintenance. "The security systems will be offline for 20 minutes during the shift change." "That's our window," Marcus concluded. Dr. Laris nodded. "It's the best opportunity you'll have." She turned to Valira, her expression grave. "Once you're inside, you'll be on your own. We can't risk communication that might be intercepted." "We understand," Valira assured her. The doctor hesitated, then embraced Valira briefly, a gesture of affection rare among the typically reserved Morathians. "What you're attempting, it could save our entire species. Or get us killed," Marcus added with grim humor. Dr. Laris turned to him, studying his scarred face with newfound respect. "You have no obligation to our world, yet you risk everything for it." She inclined her head in a formal gesture. "Whatever happens, Marcus of Earth, Know that some of us recognize your true nature beyond the fearsome exterior. Marcus accepted the acknowledgement with a nod, uncomfortable with gratitude, but understanding its significance. As the scientists departed, leaving them with the additional equipment and intelligence, he turned to Valira. Ready. She checked the secure data device containing the Formula One final time, then slipped it into a protected inner pocket of her clothing. Ready. Together, they moved toward the city, timing their approach to coincide with the security gap Dr. Laris had identified. The maintenance tunnel entrance was concealed beneath an abandoned processing facility on the city's edge, once part of the capital's industrial infrastructure, now left to decay as resources were diverted to more critical needs. They encountered no resistance at the tunnel entrance, suggesting Dr. Laris's intelligence was accurate. The passage beyond was dark and clearly long and used, forcing them to rely on portable light sources as they navigated its twisting length. The city infrastructure is failing faster than the government admits. Valira observed as they passed sections where the tunnel walls showed signs of structural deterioration. The blight affects not just living tissue, but certain synthetic materials as well. Even our technology is dying. Marcus moved ahead, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of danger. All the more reason to succeed today. They continued in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional distant rumble of the city's systems above them. After nearly 30 minutes of careful progress, they reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel connected to the broader subsurface transport network. Here they encountered their first obstacle, a security checkpoint that should have been automated but was now manned by two armed guards. The Morathian soldiers stood alert beside a scanning arch that would immediately detect unauthorized persons attempting to access the main city systems. Militaries tightened security everywhere. Marcus observed quietly as they observed from a concealed position. We need a distraction. Valira studied the checkpoint layout, her scientific mind analyzing the problem. The emergency protocols, she murmured. If there were an environmental alert, they would be forced to respond. Understanding her intent, Marcus nodded toward a control panel on the wall near their position. That environmental monitoring system, she confirmed. If I can access it, I can trigger a false contamination warning in an adjacent section. While Marcus kept watch, Valira worked quickly to override the panel security. Her clearance as a senior researcher still functioned at this peripheral level, allowing her to manipulate the environmental monitoring network. With a few precise commands, she triggered a blight contamination alert in a tunnel section 200 meters away. The effect was immediate. Alarms blared, and the guards at the checkpoint received urgent notifications on their communication devices. After a brief consultation, one of them departed at a run toward the false alert, leaving a single guard at the checkpoint. One is manageable, Marcus said, already planning his approach. Valira caught his arm. No killing, she reminded him. We're trying to save lives, not take them. Marcus nodded, though the fierce protectiveness he felt toward her made non-lethal options more challenging. With silent efficiency born from years of survival, he circled behind the checkpoint through a narrow maintenance passage, approaching the remaining guard from behind. The Morathian soldier barely had time to register a presence before Marcus's arm wrapped around his throat in a precise hold designed to render him unconscious without permanent damage. The guard struggled briefly, then went limp. Marcus lowered him carefully to the ground, then signaled to Valira that the way was clear. They passed through the checkpoint quickly, Marcus carrying the unconscious guard to a secure location where he wouldn't be immediately discovered. Beyond the checkpoint, the subsurface network became more actively maintained, evidence of their proximity to the city's vital infrastructure. We're close now, Valira said, consulting the holographic map. The communication array's access point should be 2 levels up from here. They navigated the increasingly populated areas of the subsurface network with extreme caution, using service corridors and maintenance shafts to avoid contact with city workers and security personnel. Twice they were forced to hide as patrols passed, pressed together in cramped utility spaces, their breath mingling in the close confines. During one such moment, As they waited for a security team to pass, Valira whispered, "If we succeed, when we succeed, what then?" Marcus looked down at her, surprised by the question amid their dangerous mission. "One problem at a time," he replied softly. "First we save your world. And then," she persisted, her large eyes searching his face in the dim light. Before he could answer, the security team moved on, and the moment for such contemplation passed. They continued their careful advance toward the communication array, both aware that the question hung between them, a future neither had dared to fully consider in the midst of their struggle for survival. The access point to the communication array was more heavily guarded than they had anticipated. For soldiers stood at attention before a secure elevator that would take them to the broadcast level. Bypassing such security through stealth alone would be impossible. "We need another approach," Marcus murmured as they observed from service alcove. Valira studied the soldiers, then nodded toward the insignia on their uniforms. "They're from a science protection division, technically under my authority, or at least they were before I became a fugitive. You think they'll still recognize your clearance?" "Only one way to find out." She straightened her clothing, assuming the authoritative posture of the senior scientist she had once been. "Be ready to act if this fails." Before Marcus could protest, she stepped out into the corridor and approached the guards directly. Her back was straight, her stride confident, every inch the important government researcher on urgent business. "Officers," she addressed them crisply. "Dr. Valira Nax, Biological Research Division. I need immediate access to the communication array." The guards stiffened in surprise, clearly recognizing her name. The ranking officer stepped forward. "Dr. Nax? We were informed you had defected with the Earth specimen." "Misinformation," Valira replied without hesitation. "I've been conducting critical field research on the blight progression. I have data that must be transmitted to all research facilities immediately." She held up her security credentials, gambling that they hadn't yet been completely invalidated in the system. The officer hesitated, then ran her credentials through a scanner. Marcus, watching from hiding, tensed as he waited for the result, prepared to intervene at the first sign of trouble. After what seemed an eternity, the scanner produced a result, flashing amber rather than red. Not full clearance, but not a complete rejection either. "Your status is listed as under review," the officer said with a frown. "I need to contact command for verification." "There isn't time," Valira insisted, injecting her voice with urgency. "This data contains breakthrough information on the blight's latest mutation. Every minute of delay puts more Morathian lives at risk." The officer's expression showed the conflict Marcus had seen in many Morathians when confronted with the blight crisis. Duty to authority versus the desperate need to save their dying world. After a moment of internal struggle, the officer made a decision. "I'll escort you personally," she said, gesturing to the elevator. "The others will remain at their posts." It wasn't ideal. Having an armed escort would complicate their plan, but it was better than fighting their way through 4 trained soldiers. Valira nodded acceptance, and the officer instructed the elevator to admit them. As the doors closed, leaving just Valira and the officer inside, Marcus moved swiftly. Using his enhanced strength and speed, he scaled the exterior of the elevator shaft, following their ascent through the maintenance ladder built into the wall. If trouble erupted above, he would be only moments behind. The elevator rose smoothly to the broadcast level of the communication array. As the doors opened, Valira maintained her authoritative demeanor, striding purposefully toward the main control room with the officer following close behind. The broadcast level was a hub of activity, with technicians monitoring planetary communications and data flow. All wore the insignia of the Military Science Division, indicating the government's tight control over information. Valira moved through them with practiced familiarity, heading directly for the central broadcast console. "This terminal," she said, reaching the main control station. "I need full access to the planetary network." The technician at the console looked to the officer for confirmation, who nodded reluctantly. "Priority research transmission," the officer explained. "Direct authorization." As the technician moved aside, Valira took his place, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls as she began the process of uploading the treatment formula. The officer watched closely, her expression still showing conflict between duty and hope. "What is this data exactly?" the officer asked, peering at the complex molecular structures appearing on the screen. "A treatment protocol for blight contamination," Valira answered truthfully, continuing her work. "Potentially effective against all known strains." The officer's eyes widened. "You've developed a cure?" "A treatment," Valira corrected, not looking up from her task. "Not complete healing, but a way to halt progression and begin recovery." Hope warred with suspicion in the officer's expression. Why wasn't this reported through proper channels? Why the secrecy? Valira paused, meeting the officer's gaze directly. Because some would use it as a weapon rather than a cure, would distribute it only to those deemed valuable to the regime. The accusation hung in the air between them. Around the control room, other technicians had begun to take notice of the exchange, some moving closer to listen. "That's a serious allegation, Dr. Nax," the officer said, her hand moving subtly toward her weapon. "It's the truth," Valira replied calmly. "And deep down, you know it. The blight doesn't discriminate between military and civilian, between government loyalist and insurgent. All Morathians deserve the chance to survive." The control room had grown silent, all eyes now on the confrontation between the fugitive scientist and the military officer. The upload of the formula continued in the background, progress indicators showing it was nearly 70% complete. "You defied direct orders," the officer said, her voice hardening. "Freed a dangerous alien specimen. Transmitted classified research data to unauthorized personnel." "I did what was necessary to save our people," Valira countered. "What would you have done in my position?" Before the officer could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. On auxiliary screens, security alerts flashed. Marcus had been detected following the elevator. It was a deception, the officer realized, drawing her weapon fully now. "You are a defector." "No," Valira shook her head. "I'm a doctor first. A Morathian first." The deception was necessary because the truth wouldn't have been believed. The officer raised her weapon, aiming directly at Valira. "Step away from the console. The upload will be terminated." "It's too late," Valira said, nodding toward the progress indicator, now at 85%. "In less than a minute, every research facility on Morith will have the formula. Military control of the cure ends today." The tension in the control room was palpable as the officer faced a momentous decision: follow orders or allow the formula to spread across Morith. As she wavered, the door to the control room burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space, his expression fierce. The technician shrank back in fear at the sight of the monster from Earth, but he had eyes only for Valira and the officer threatening her. "It's over," he said, his voice a low growl of warning. "Lower your weapon." The officer turned, now caught between threats, the upload that would undermine military control and the fearsome alien ready to attack. In that moment of divided attention, Valira pressed the final command sequence, completing the transmission. "Done," she announced. "The formula has been sent." On screens throughout the control room, confirmation messages appeared as research facilities across the planet acknowledged receipt of the data. The cure for the blight was now beyond any single group's control. It belonged to all of Morith. The officer's weapon wavered, then slowly lowered. "You realize what you've done?" she asked, her voice quiet. "General Mazik will consider this treason." "I consider it salvation," Valira replied. "And I think history will agree." Around them, the technicians were already examining the formula data, murmuring among themselves as they recognized its significance. The hope that had been so long absent from Morith began to kindle in their expressions. Marcus moved to Valira's side, placing himself protectively between her and the officer. "What now?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, the main communication screen activated, showing General Mazik's stern face. His eyes widened momentarily at the sight of Marcus and Valira together in the control room. "Dr. Nax," he said, his voice cold, "I see the reports of your defection were accurate. And you've brought your specimen with you. The specimen has a name, Valira replied, and he's just helped save our entire species. The treatment formula has been distributed to every research facility on Morith. Production can begin immediately. Mazik's expression darkened. Without proper testing, without military oversight, you've potentially doomed us all with this reckless action. The formula works, Valira insisted. We've confirmed it against all known blight strains, and its distribution ensures that no one group can control who lives and who dies. The general's gaze shifted to Marcus. And you, Earth creature, what do you gain from this betrayal? Marcus met the general's stare without flinching. I've seen what happens when survival becomes a privilege rather than a right. Your world doesn't have to end like mine did. The standoff continued for several tense moments. Then Mazik's expression shifted subtly. Security teams are already on their way to your location. You've played your hand, Dr. Nax. Now we'll play ours. The communication cut off abruptly. Around them, the technicians looked uncertain, caught between their duty to the military and the hope that Valira's formula represented. We need to leave, Marcus said urgently. Now, the officer who had escorted Valira stepped forward. The main exits will already be blocked, she said, surprising them both. But there's a maintenance access through the environmental control section. I can show you. Valira stared at her in shock. You're helping us? Why? The officer glanced around at her fellow Morathians, seeing the same hope in their eyes that she felt herself. Because I joined the service to protect my people. All of them. She straightened her posture. If this formula works, you've done more to fulfill that duty than any military action could. Without further discussion, the officer led them through a series of restricted areas, bypassing the main security points where Mazik's forces would be gathering. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the military response team entering the broadcast level, but their head start gave them precious minutes of escape time. The maintenance access led them to a service elevator that descended to the subsurface level much faster than their careful infiltration had ascended. As they reached the bottom, alarms continued to sound throughout the facility. This path will take you to the outer industrial district, the officer explained, indicating a utility tunnel. From there, you're on your own. Valira clasped the officer's arm in the Morathian gesture of gratitude. Thank you. When the treatment begins to work, remember that you helped make it possible. The officer nodded once, then turned back toward the elevator. I never saw you, she said simply. Now go. They didn't need to be told twice. Marcus and Valira moved swiftly through the utility tunnel, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant behind them. The route was less direct than their entry had been, taking them through sections of the subsurface network that showed clear signs of blight contamination, walls corroded by the aggressive agent, supporting structures weakened. The city infrastructure is failing faster than I realized, Valira observed as they navigated a particularly damaged section. If the treatment hadn't been distributed today. Focus on now, Marcus reminded her, helping her across a gap where the floor had partially collapsed. We're not safe yet. They continued through the deteriorating tunnels, the devastation around them a stark reminder of what was at stake. The blight had progressed further than the government publicly admitted, threatening not just the people of Morith, but the very foundations of their civilization. After what seemed an eternity of cautious advance, they reached an access point to the industrial district where they had begun their mission. Marcus climbed up first, checking for security forces before helping Valira up after him. The gray twilight of Morith's surface seemed almost welcoming after the claustrophobic tension of the tunnels. We need to reach the rendezvous point, Valira said, orienting herself. Dr. Laris should be waiting with transport. They moved through the industrial ruins, constantly alert for pursuit. The distant sound of search vessels could be heard, but the complexity of the abandoned structures provided ample cover as they made their way toward the arranged meeting location. The rendezvous point was a collapsed storage facility on the outskirts of the industrial zone, unremarkable among the general decay, but positioned with good visibility of approaching threats. As they neared it, Marcus sensed something wrong. Wait, he said, pulling Valira into cover beside him. Something's not right. He studied the area carefully, his enhanced senses picking up subtleties a Morathian might miss. The air carried traces of recent energy weapon discharge, and the pattern of debris near the entrance had been disturbed. There was a confrontation, he concluded grimly. Recently, Valira's expression tightened with concern. Dr. Laris? Moving with extreme caution, they approached the rendezvous point. Inside the collapsed structure, they found signs of a brief but intense firefight, scorched walls, overturned equipment, and blood. The distinctive blue of Morathian physiology spread in a pattern that told its own story of violence. No bodies, Marcus observed, examining the scene. They were taken. Valira knelt beside the largest blood stain, her scientific training allowing her to analyze what had happened despite her personal distress. Military precision, she said, pointing to the pattern of energy weapon impacts. Not insurgents. This was Mazique's forces. The implication was clear. Dr. Laris and her team had been captured, likely in an attempt to lure Valira and Marcus into a trap. The rendezvous point was almost certainly under surveillance now. We can't stay here, Marcus said, already scanning for exit routes. And we can't use any of the planned extraction methods. They'll all be compromised. Valira nodded, rising to her feet with newfound resolve despite the setback. Then we make our own way. The formula is distributed. That was our primary mission. Now we need to survive long enough to see it implemented. They slipped away from the compromised rendezvous point, using Marcus's survival instincts and Valira's knowledge of Morith geography to navigate toward the wasteland beyond the city. If they could reach the unpatrolled areas, they might find another way to connect with allies of Dr. Laris, scientists who shared her commitment to saving all Morathians, not just those the military deemed valuable. As they traveled, the sound of pursuit grew more distant. They had gained a temporary reprieve, but both knew that Mazique would not simply abandon the hunt. The Earth monster and the Morathian doctor who had defied military authority represented too significant a symbol, both of resistance and of hope. Night fell over Morith, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep into bones and spirit alike. They found shelter in the ruins of what had once been a research outpost, now long abandoned to the Blight's inexorable advance. Inside, they used the minimal supplies they still carried to establish a defensible position where they could rest and recover from the day's exertions. As Valira activated a small heating unit to ward off the worst of the cold, Marcus secured the perimeter, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of pursuit. When he returned to their makeshift camp, he found her studying a small communication device salvaged from the Hydroponics Research Center. Any contact? He asked, though her expression already told him the answer. She shook her head. All channels are either blocked or monitored. But she looked up at him, a spark of hope in her large eyes. I've been monitoring the scientific emergency frequency. There are reports coming in from multiple research facilities. They've already begun synthesizing the treatment. Production is underway. Marcus settled beside her, his larger frame providing additional warmth against the Morathian night. Then we succeeded, he said simply. In that mission, yes. Valira leaned against him, accepting the comfort of his presence. But Dr. Laris and her team, she trailed off, unable to complete the thought. We'll find them, Marcus promised, though he knew the odds were against it. Or they'll find a way to reach us. Scientists can be surprisingly resourceful when motivated. A small smile touched Valira's lips at his attempt to comfort her. Yes, we can be. The smile faded as she contemplated their situation. But what now, Marcus? Where do we go from here? It was the question she had attempted to ask earlier, now unavoidable in the quiet aftermath of their mission. Marcus was silent for a long moment, considering a future he had never expected to contemplate. I don't know, he admitted finally. I never thought beyond survival. On Earth, that was all that mattered. Here, he looked down at her, this alien woman who had transformed from captor to ally to something far more significant. Here I found something worth surviving for. Valira's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in what had become a familiar gesture of connection. When a treatment begins to take effect, When the Blight's progression is halted, Morith will need to rebuild. Not just structures and systems, but trust, faith in a future worth creating. Marcus understood what she was suggesting, that they could be part of that rebuilding, that their unlikely alliance could serve as a symbol of cooperation and hope, that the monster from Earth and the doctor from Morith might find a place together in the world they had helped save. "I'm not exactly a builder," he said, gesturing to his scarred hands. "Earth made me for breaking things, not fixing them." "Earth made you a survivor," Valira corrected him. "And survival isn't just about strength or violence. It's about adaptation, about finding a new purpose when the old one no longer serves." Her words resonated with something deep within him, a longing for more than mere existence, for a life with meaning beyond the next fight or flight. On Earth, such dreams had seemed like dangerous distractions from the brutal reality of daily survival. But here, with her, perhaps something different was possible. Before he could respond, a soft chime sounded from the communication device. Valira activated it immediately, hope and wariness mingling in her expression as she monitored the incoming transmission. "It's encrypted," she said, her fingers moving quickly over the controls, using one of Dr. Laris's personal algorithms. After a tense moment of decryption, a message appeared, brief but clear. "Treatment distribution successful. Military divided on response. Insurgent leadership offering amnesty to all scientific personnel. Mazik removed from command. Safe houses being established. Further instructions to follow. Stay alive." Valira read the message aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's happening," she said, looking up at Marcus with wonder. "The formula is changing everything, just as we hoped." The news brought a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that their mission had succeeded beyond their immediate actions. Hope that Dr. Laris might have survived. Caution about the rapid political shifts that were occurring. "Don't trust it completely," Marcus warned, his survivor's instincts still strong. "Power vacuums create their own dangers." Valira nodded, understanding his caution. "We wait for verification. For now, we stay hidden, stay safe." As if in response to her words, a distant sound caught Marcus's attention, the distinctive hum of search vessels growing closer. Their reprieve had been brief indeed. "We need to move," he said, already gathering their meager supplies. They've expanded the search perimeter faster than expected. Together, they slipped out of their temporary shelter, moving deeper into the wasteland where the ruins grew more chaotic and the blight contamination more severe. It was dangerous territory, avoided by most Morathians, but that very danger provided them cover from pursuit. As they navigated the treacherous landscape, Marcus found himself drawing on survival skills honed on Earth's ravaged surface, while Valira applied her scientific knowledge to identify safe passages through contaminated areas. Together, they formed a partnership unlike any either world had seen. The strength and instinct of Earth's evolution combined with the intelligence and adaptability of Morris civilization. The search vessels continued their methodical patterns behind them, but as the night deepened, the gap between pursuers and fugitives widened. They had won this round of the chase, buying themselves time to rest and plan their next move. In the deepest part of the night, they found shelter in what had once been a blight monitoring station, now abandoned but still structurally sound. Inside, they established a more secure temporary base, using Valira's scientific knowledge to activate the station's dormant systems without creating detectable energy signatures that might reveal their presence. As a source of heat slowly warmed the small space, they finally allowed themselves to truly rest. Valira, exhausted from the physical and emotional demands of their mission, drifted towards sleep. Marcus kept watch, his enhanced body requiring less recovery time. In the quiet of their sanctuary, he studied her sleeping form, so different from him in origin and design, yet now so deeply connected to his fate. On Earth, he had been feared as a monster, a product of harsh evolution and desperate survival. On Morith, he had begun as a captive specimen, then become a fugitive, and now he was something else entirely. Something neither world had a name for. Outside, the endless gray twilight of Morith began to lighten slightly, not into true dawn, but into the muted day that was all this wounded planet could now produce. But for the first time since the blight began, that light carried a promise that had long been absent: hope. The monster from Earth and the doctor from Morith had changed the course of a world together. And in doing so, perhaps they had found something neither had thought possible in the harsh reality of their respective worlds, a future worth living for rather than merely surviving for. As Valira stirred, her eyes opening to find Marcus still watching over her, she smiled, a simple expression that conveyed more than words could. Her hand reached for his, and he took it without hesitation. "They called you a monster," she said softly. But they were wrong. Marcus looked down at their joined hands, his large and scarred, hers small and blue. "I was what Earth needed me to be," he replied. Here I can be something else." "We both can," she agreed. Outside their shelter, the sounds of search vessels had faded entirely. In their place, a new sound gradually became audible, distant but growing clearer. Communication broadcasts, spreading across emergency channels, reporting the first confirmed cases of blight recession in patients treated with a new formula. Their mission had succeeded. Their journey of survival would continue. But most importantly, something new had been born in the unlikeliest of circumstances: understanding between worlds, hope amidst destruction, and a connection that transcended the barriers of species and origin. The monster from Earth had found his humanity on an alien world, and Morith had found its salvation in the genetics of a creature it had once feared. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as captive and captor, not as monster and scientist, but as partners in the rebuilding of a world that had nearly been lost. "What happens next?" Marcus said, answering her earlier question at last, "is up to us." They called him a monster. He said he was just raised on Earth. The ice-cold air whistled through the ventilation ducts of the Morith research station, carrying with it the sterile scent of antiseptic and fear. Outside, the perpetual gray sky hung low over jagged buildings that pierced the horizon like broken teeth. Inside, Marcus lay strapped to a biocontainment bed, his massive frame barely contained by restraints designed for beings much smaller than him. His eyes snapped open, wild, alert, dangerous. The guards standing at the door flinched, their weapons rising instinctively. Even sedated, there was something about his gaze that unnerved them, something feral that spoke of violence barely contained beneath his scarred skin. "He's awake," one of the guards whispered into his communication device. "Alert Dr. Valira." Marcus flexed against his restraints, testing their strength. Each was reinforced with metal alloys not found on his home planet. The thought made him grimace. Earth. The word echoed in his mind like a distant memory, fragmented and hazy from whatever drugs they had pumped into his system. He remembered fire, endless warfare, the bitter taste of polluted water, and the constant fight for resources in a world that had cannibalizing itself through nuclear devastation and environmental collapse. He remembered survival, brutal, merciless survival that had shaped him into what these aliens now feared. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and a slender figure entered. Dr. Valira moved with calculated precision, her thin fingers dancing across a holographic display that hovered just above her wrist. She was small compared to Marcus, fragile-looking with her pale blue skin and large, pupil-less eyes. But there was nothing fragile about the cold intelligence behind those eyes. "Subject appears to have recovered from sedation faster than anticipated," she said, her voice carefully modulated to hide any emotion. "Increase monitoring protocols." "I'm not a subject," Marcus growled, his voice rough from disuse. It was the first time he had spoken since being captured during the cross-planetary raid. Or had he been purchased as a slave warrior? The memory was still foggy. "My name is Marcus." Valira paused, her eyes flickering up from her display to study him. "Names are irrelevant to scientific inquiry. Your genetic structure and physiological responses are what concern me." "And what exactly are you looking for, Doctor?" He emphasized her title with a mocking edge. "What makes a monster like me so valuable to your kind. She approached him, unafraid despite the warnings from her colleagues. Marcus had already killed 2 guards during his initial capture, snapping their necks with frightening ease before they managed to subdue him. "You're not a monster. You're simply an anomaly," she replied. "Your cellular regeneration rate exceeds anything documented on Morith. Your body neutralizes toxins that would kill our strongest soldiers. Your muscle density and bone structure suggest evolution in a higher gravity environment with significant environmental stressors." She leaned closer, studying the scars that crisscrossed his face and arms. "Whatever Earth is, it created something remarkable in you." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that made the guards tighten their grips on their weapons. "Earth didn't create me, Doctor. Earth destroyed everything weak and left only the strong. I'm just what remains after generations of the planet trying to kill us." Something flickered across Valira's face. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first hint of something less clinical. But she masked it quickly, turning back to her display. "Tomorrow we begin the detailed examination of your genetic material," she said. "I suggest you cooperate. It will be less uncomfortable for you." As she turned to leave, Marcus caught her gaze one final time. "What is it you're really after? What does Morith want with Earth's monsters?" Valira hesitated at the doorway, her slender form silhouetted against the harsh lighting of the corridor beyond. "Survival," she said simply, and then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with his restraints and the watchful eyes of guards who viewed him as something less than sentient. In the silence that followed, he closed his eyes again, focusing on the feeling of his accelerated healing repairing whatever damage their last round of tests had done. He wasn't a monster, not in his own eyes. He was a survivor, and survivors watched, waited, and found their moment. On Morith, rumors spread quickly among the scientific community. The alien creature from the planet called Earth was unlike anything they had encountered before. Some whispered that he could not be killed, that his flesh knitted itself back together no matter what wounds were inflicted. Others claimed he had the strength of 10 Morathian soldiers. The military leadership watched the reports with growing interest, seeing not a scientific curiosity, but a potential weapon. And in her private quarters, Dr. Valira reviewed blood samples that held secrets she had not shared with her superiors, secrets that might save her dying world, if only she could unlock them in time. The examination chamber was a gleaming testament to Morathian technological advancement, clinical, efficient, and utterly merciless in its pursuit of knowledge. Marcus lay spread-eagled on the metal table, thick restraints binding his limbs as Valira and her assistants moved around him with the detached efficiency of scientists who viewed their subject as a fascinating specimen rather than a sentient being. "Beginning cellular stress response test," Valira announced, her voice steady as she adjusted a needle-like instrument positioned above Marcus's exposed chest. "Prepare tissue extraction sequence." Marcus's eyes followed her movements, his jaw clenched in anticipation of pain. It wasn't the first time they had extracted samples from him, chunks of muscle, bone marrow, blood by the leader. His body could heal from it all, but that didn't make the process any less excruciating. The needle descended, piercing deep into his chest. Marcus's body arched against the restraints, a roar of pain tearing from his throat. The assistants flinched back, but Valira remained steady, her eyes fixed on the monitor recording his biological responses. "Fascinating," she murmured as the needle withdrew, carrying with it a cylindrical sample of heart tissue. "The cellular repair has already begun. Subject shows 400% accelerated healing compared to baseline Morathian recovery rates." "I told you," Marcus gasped through gritted teeth as the wound in his chest began to close visibly. "Earth doesn't breed weakness." Valira's assistant, a younger Morathian with nervously fluttering hands, approached with another instrument. "Dr. Valira, shall we proceed with the neural response testing?" Something in Marcus snapped. Perhaps it was the clinical detachment in their voices, or perhaps it was simply that his body, remarkable as it was, had limits to what it could endure. With a surge of strength that surprised even him, he flexed against his right restraint. The The metal groaned, then shattered with a sound like breaking bone. Alarms blared instantly. His free hand shot out, grabbing the nearest piece of medical equipment and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall in a shower of sparks and broken components. Security breach. Contain the subject. Valira's voice cut through the chaos, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A flash of something almost like admiration before it was swallowed by professional concern. Armed guards poured into the room, weapons trained on Marcus, who had managed to free his other arm and was working on the restraints around his ankles. Valira stepped between them, her slender form absurdly fragile before Marcus's hulking frame. "Stand down," she ordered the guards. He's still partially restrained. "Dr. Valira," the senior security officer protested. "General Mazik's orders are clear. If the Earth specimen shows any signs of aggression, we are authorized to use lethal force and waste months of critical research." Valira countered, her voice sharp. "If you damage this subject, you'll answer to the Science Council before you answer to Mazik." The tension in the room crackled like electricity. Marcus could have struck out, could have snapped Valira's neck in an instant and used her body as a shield against the guards. But something in her willingness to stand between him and the weapons gave him pause. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his freed arms to his sides. "I won't fight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But I'm done being cut open today." Valira studied him, her large eyes unblinking. Then she nodded once. "We've collected sufficient data for today's session. Return the subject to his containment cell. Double the guard rotation." As the guards approached with new restraints, Marcus locked eyes with her. "This mercy isn't for your benefit," he said quietly. "I just need to know more before I make my move." "This isn't mercy," she replied, equally soft. "It's practical research management. Nothing more." But as they led him away, the ghost of uncertainty lingered on her face. In the sterile corridors of the research station, word began to spread. The monster from Earth had shown restraint. And perhaps more worryingly, Dr. Valira Nax, the station's most brilliant and detached researcher, had shown something that looked dangerously close to compassion. In the high towers of Morith's capital, the news reached General Mazik with alarming speed. The military leader's face darkened as he reviewed the security footage from the research station. "She's getting too close to the subject," he told his advisors, his claw-like fingers drumming against the polished surface of the strategy table. "We need results, not rapport." The bioweapon potential of this creature's genetic material could turn the tide against the insurgents. One of his lieutenants leaned forward, her voice hushed. "There are reports that the insurgent faction has learned of the Earth specimen. Our intelligence suggests they're planning a raid on the research station." Mazik's expression hardened further. "Then we accelerate the timeline. Tell Dr. Valira she has 2 cycles to extract what we need from the creature, or we'll bring in someone who will." Across the gray landscape of Morith, in underground bunkers and abandoned industrial zones, the insurgent forces were indeed planning. Their leader, Commander Vex, had paid handsomely for information about the alien creature that could regenerate from any wound. "If the government creates soldiers with this power," he told his followers, "our cause dies. We must secure the Earth specimen before they can weaponize it." The pieces were moving into place. The monster from Earth, the cold doctor with her hidden agenda, the military that saw only a weapon, and the rebels who feared that weapon's potential, all spinning toward an inevitable collision. And in his cell, Marcus stared at the ceiling, feeling his body heal while his mind raced. Earth had taught him one crucial lesson. In chaos lay opportunity. And chaos, he sensed, was coming to Morith very soon. The recovery periods between experiments became a strange respite for Marcus. Valira would come alone, ostensibly to monitor his healing progress, but increasingly their conversation strayed beyond the clinical. "Your world," she said one day, her fingers moving across her datapad as she recorded observations. "This Earth. Was it always as you described?" Marcus lay on his bed, watching her through half-lidded eyes. His chest, which had been splayed open just hours before, was now sealed with only a faint red line to show where the incision had been. No, he answered after a long pause. There are stories. Old stories about blue skies and clean water. About forests that stretched for thousands of miles and oceans teeming with life. He gave a bitter laugh. Fairy tales for children born in bunkers. What changed it? We did. Slowly, then all at once. Wars over dwindling resources. Nuclear winter. Engineered plagues designed to target enemy populations that mutated and spread beyond control. He sat up, muscles flexing under scarred skin. Earth became a crucible. Those who couldn't adapt died. Those who adapted became different. Valira's fingers stilled on her datapad. Different like you? I'm third generation post-collapse. My grandfather was one of the first to show the mutations. Accelerated healing, enhanced strength, resistance to radiation and toxins. Natural selection accelerated by unnatural means. He studied her, this alien woman with her blue skin and oversized eyes. Your people look at me and see a monster. I look at myself and see the cost of survival. Something shifted in Valira's expression, a softening around her eyes. Morith understands survival, she said quietly. More than you know. Before she could elaborate, the door slid open and one of her junior researchers entered, casting a nervous glance at Marcus before addressing Valira. Doctor, General Mazik's representative is here. They're demanding accelerated results from the Earth specimen research. Valira's posture stiffened. Inform them that science cannot be rushed without compromising results. They said to tell you specifically that the containment protocols for the Blight have failed in 3 more sectors. The death toll has reached 30,000. The color drained from Valira's already pale face. She cast one unreadable glance at Marcus before following the junior researcher out, the door sealing behind them with its usual pneumatic hiss. Marcus sat in silence, processing this new information. The Blight. A disease, perhaps? Something killing the Morathians in significant numbers. And somehow, they believed his biology might hold the key to fighting it. He didn't have long to contemplate this revelation. Less than an hour later, the first explosion rocked the research station. The lights flickered, plunging his cell into momentary darkness before the emergency systems activated, bathing everything in a dim red glow. Alarms wailed, and through the reinforced door, he could hear the sound of weapons fire and shouting. His enhanced hearing picked up fragmented communications from the guards outside. Perimeter breach in sectors 3 and 7. Insurgent forces protect the primary research subjects. Evacuation protocol. The door to his cell burst open. Valira stood there, her usual composure fractured. A small weapon was clutched in her hand, and a smear of what looked like blue blood, not her own, stained her lab coat. "We need to move," she said urgently. "The facility is under attack." Marcus stood, towering over her. "Why should I help you escape? This could be my chance for freedom." "Because the insurgents don't want to free you," she replied, her voice sharp with tension. "They want to possess you. To the government, you're a research subject. To the rebels, you'd be a weapon to be used and discarded." She met his gaze directly. "At least with me, you're a being with a name." Before Marcus could respond, the corridor behind Valira erupted in weapons fire. She ducked into the cell as energy blasts scorched the wall where she had been standing. Without thinking, Marcus pulled her behind him, shielding her with his larger body. 3 armed insurgents appeared in the doorway, their faces covered by breathing apparatus, their weapons trained on the cell's occupants. They wore no uniforms, just a haphazard collection of repurposed military gear and civilian clothing. "The Earth creature," one of them barked. "Secured alive. Kill the doctor." Marcus didn't wait for them to fire. He launched himself forward with a speed that belied his size, crossing the distance to the doorway in a blur of movement. The first insurgent's weapon discharged, the energy bolt grazing Marcus's shoulder and leaving a smoking furrow that began healing almost instantly. His fist connected with the insurgent's chest, sending the man flying backward into his companions. There was the sickening crunch of breaking bones, and the insurgent went limp. The other 2 scrambled to bring their weapons to bear, but Marcus was already upon them, a whirlwind of precisely applied violence. It was over in seconds. 3 bodies lay motionless in the corridor, and Marcus stood among them, breathing heavily not from exertion, but from the savage joy of finally releasing the pent-up anger of his captivity. He turned to find Valira staring at him, her weapon still clutched tightly, but not pointed at him. "We need to go," she said after a moment, her voice steadier than he expected. "There will be more." "Where?" he demanded. "There's a maintenance tunnel network beneath this level. It connects to the surface evacuation routes. If we can reach it." She left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Survival was not guaranteed. Marcus nodded once, then bent to retrieve one of the fallen insurgents' weapons. It felt awkward in his hand, designed for different proportions, but the basic principles of weapons hadn't changed much from Earth to Morith. "Lead the way, Doctor," he said. "But understand this. I'm not going back to being your lab rat when this is over." Valira's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something like genuine emotion in them. Fear, determination, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "When this is over," she said quietly, "nothing will be the same for either of us." Together, they moved into the chaos-filled corridors of the research station, an unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of violence. Behind them, the alarms continued to wail, and ahead, the sound of battle echoed like thunder. Morith's carefully maintained order was shattering, and in its place, only survival remained, a concept that Marcus understood all too well. Smoke filled the corridors, acrid and thick with the scent of burned circuitry and something else, the distinctive odor of Morathian blood, which carried a faint metallic sweetness unlike the iron tang of human blood. Marcus moved ahead of Valira, using his larger frame to shield her as they navigated the battle-damaged research facility. The main pathways were chaos, security forces exchanging fire with insurgents, scientists and support staff caught in crossfire. Twice they had to double back as they encountered insurgent squads moving methodically through the facility, clearly searching for something. "For him. Here," Valira gasped, pulling Marcus toward what appeared to be a solid wall. Her slender fingers danced across an almost invisible panel, and a section of the wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "Maintenance access. Only senior research staff have the codes." They slipped inside, the panel sliding shut behind them just as the sound of booted feet rounded the corner they had vacated. The passage was dimly lit by strips of emergency lighting along the floor, casting everything in a ghostly blue glow that made Valira's skin appear almost luminescent. "How far do these tunnels go?" Marcus asked, his voice hushed despite the thick walls that separated them from the fighting. "They run beneath the entire facility," Valira replied, leading the way down a steep incline. They were designed as both maintenance routes and emergency evacuation paths in case of containment failures or other disasters. The way she hesitated on those last words caught Marcus's attention. What kind of other disasters was this place designed to withstand? Valira's pace slowed, but she didn't turn to face him. Morith wasn't always as you see it now. The environmental degradation, the perpetual gray skies. These are relatively recent developments in our history. The blight, Marcus guessed. It's not just a disease, is it? She stopped then, turning to face him in the narrow confines of the tunnel. They were close enough that he could feel the slight chill that radiated from her body. Morathians ran cooler than humans, another physiological difference his captors had documented extensively. "No," she admitted. "The blight is the name we gave to a cascade of biological and environmental failures. It began as a bioweapon developed during our last global conflict, designed to target specific genetic markers. But like your Earth plagues, it mutated, expanded its target range. Now it affects not just enemy populations, but our entire ecosystem. Our atmosphere, our water sources, even our food crops are contaminated." Her large eyes studied his face, looking for something, understanding, perhaps, or judgment. "That's why you're so valuable to us, Marcus. Your cellular resistance to toxins, your regenerative capabilities. They could be the key to developing a cure, or at least a treatment that would allow our species to survive while we try to heal our world. The revelation hung between them in the close confines of the tunnel. Marcus was silent, processing this information and its implications. All the tests, the samples, the pain, it hadn't been mere scientific curiosity or military weapon development. It had been desperation. A distant explosion rocked the facility above them, sending dust cascading from the ceiling of the tunnel. The moment of revelation was broken. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Your people's problems aren't mine." But even as he said it, something shifted in his perception. He had seen Valira not as the cold scientist who had authorized his pain, but as a woman fighting for her people's survival. It was a motivation he understood all too well. They continued deeper into the tunnel network, the sounds of battle growing more distant above them. The tunnels branched and intersected in complex patterns, but Valira navigated them with confidence, occasionally checking small map displays embedded in the walls. "There's an emergency exit half a kilometer ahead," she explained. "It leads to the surface about 2 kilometers from the facility perimeter. If we can reach it." Her words cut off as they rounded a corner and found themselves facing 3 armed insurgents who were clearly as surprised by the encounter as they were. For a heartbeat, everyone froze in shock. Then the world exploded into violence. The insurgents raised their weapons, but Marcus was already moving. He grabbed Valira and threw them both sideways into a branching tunnel as energy bolts sizzled through the air where they had been standing. The confined space worked to their disadvantage. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to retreat. "Stay back," Marcus growled, pushing Valira behind him as he prepared to charge their attackers. But to his surprise, she stepped up beside him, her small weapon raised. "I'm not defenseless," she said, her voice steady despite the fear he could smell coming off her in waves. The first insurgent rounded the corner, weapons sweeping the tunnel. Valira fired, her aim precise. The energy bolt caught the attacker in the shoulder, spinning them around with a cry of pain. Marcus seized the opportunity, lunging forward to grab the fallen insurgent's weapon, a much larger, more powerful model than the one Valira carried. The next moments were a blur of violence and precision. Marcus fired the appropriated weapon down the main tunnel, forcing the remaining insurgents to take cover. Valira, showing unexpected tactical awareness, moved to a position where she could target them if they tried to advance. "We can't stay here," she called to Marcus over the sound of weapon discharges. "They'll call for reinforcements." Marcus nodded grimly. With a roar that echoed through the confined space, he charged forward, using his body as a battering ram. The insurgents, unprepared for such a frontal assault, were caught off guard. One went down beneath his bulk. The other managed to fire a shot that grazed Marcus's thigh before Valira's well-placed shot knocked the weapon from the insurgent's hand. The skirmish ended as quickly as it had begun. Marcus stood breathing heavily among the fallen insurgents, fresh wounds already closing on his body. He looked back at Valira, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and something that might have been awe. "You could have been killed," she said, approaching cautiously. "But I wasn't," he replied simply. "This is what I was made for." Valira's gaze lingered on the wounds that were visibly healing before her eyes. "No," she said softly. "I don't think this is what you were made for at all, but it is what your world forced you to become." The moment was interrupted by the sound of distant shouting echoing through the tunnels. More insurgents, searching for their missing comrades. "We need to move," Marcus said, retrieving one of the fallen insurgents' weapons for Valira to replace her smaller one. She took it without hesitation, their fingers brushing in the exchange, the first voluntary physical contact between them. They continued through the tunnels with renewed urgency, both now armed and increasingly operating not as captor and captive, but as allies in survival. The exit Valira had mentioned loomed ahead, a heavy hatch set into the ceiling of the tunnel, accessible via a narrow maintenance ladder. "This leads to the surface?" Marcus confirmed, studying the hatch. Valira nodded. It should exit in an abandoned industrial zone about 2 kilometers from the facility perimeter. From there, she hesitated. From there, we'll need to find somewhere to hide until I can contact trusted colleagues. Marcus's eyes narrowed. And then what, Doctor? Back to the lab for more experiments. No, she said, and the certainty in her voice surprised him. But you've seen what the insurgents want to do with you, and the military is no better. I need time to think, to plan. We both do. Marcus studied her face, searching for deception and finding instead only exhaustion and resolve. Finally, he nodded and moved to the ladder. I'll go first, he said. If there's trouble waiting, better it finds me than you. He climbed quickly, pushing against the hatch. It resisted briefly, then gave way with a groan of rarely used mechanics. Cool air rushed in, fresher than the recycled atmosphere of the facility, though still carrying the acrid taint that seemed to permeate all of Morith. Marcus pulled himself out onto the surface, then reached back to help Valira up after him. As her smaller hand grasped his, he was struck by how fragile she seemed. This woman who had authorized countless painful procedures on his body, who had viewed him as a specimen rather than a person. Yet here she was, trusting her life to him. They emerged into the perpetual twilight of Morith's surface. Above them, the gray sky was tinged with the orange glow of fires burning at the research facility. Around them stretched the ruins of what had once been some kind of manufacturing complex. Skeletal buildings with broken windows, abandoned machinery, slowly being reclaimed by the sparse, tough vegetation of Morith. In the distance, the silhouette of the research facility stood against the horizon, smoke rising from multiple breaches in its once secure perimeter. The sound of weapons fire still echoed faintly across the barren landscape. What now? Marcus asked, scanning their surroundings for threats. Valira pointed to a cluster of relatively intact buildings in the distance. Those old worker dormitories might provide shelter for now. We need to treat our wounds and plan our next move. As if on cue, she winced, one hand going to her side where a spreading stain of blue darkened her lab coat. Marcus hadn't even noticed she'd been injured in the firefight. Without comment, he moved to her side, supporting her weight with one arm. Together, they made their way across the blighted landscape of Morith, two beings from different worlds united by the most basic instinct of all, survival. The abandoned worker dormitory was a testament to Morith's industrial past, a 3-story structure of durable materials now weathered by time and the planet's increasingly hostile environment. The entrance was partially blocked by debris, but Marcus cleared it easily, his enhanced strength making short work of the obstacle. Inside, the building was surprisingly intact. The synthetic materials favored by Morathian construction had resisted decay better than their Earth counterparts would have. The air was stale but breathable, and most importantly, the location offered vantage points to observe any approach. Valira's wound, while not immediately life-threatening, needed attention. Marcus guided her to what appeared to have been a common area on the ground floor, helping her onto a dusty but serviceable piece of furniture that resembled a couch. Medical supplies, she gasped, her normally blue skin taking on a worrying grayish tinge. There might be a first aid station. Standard protocol for worker housing. Marcus nodded and began searching the area methodically. The building had been abandoned in haste. Personal effects still littered some rooms, frozen in time like artifacts of a vanished civilization. In what appeared to be a security office, he found what he was looking for, a wall-mounted emergency medical kit, its seal unbroken. When he returned, Valira had removed her lab coat and the upper layer of her clothing to reveal the wound. A deep energy weapon graze that had burned through her side, exposing what looked like muscle tissue beneath her blue skin. The injury wasn't bleeding heavily, but the edges of the wound had a worrying discoloration. Their weapons are designed to prevent quick healing, she explained, seeing his concern. Anticoagulant properties in the energy discharge. Marcus knelt beside her, opening the medical kit. It contained supplies unfamiliar to him, labeled in Morathian script he couldn't read. I don't know what these are, he admitted. Valira's slender fingers sorted through the supplies with professional efficiency despite her pain. This, she said, selecting a small cylinder, is a cellular stabilizer. And this, she picked up what looked like a thin sheet of metallic material, is a biofusion mesh. It creates a scaffold for tissue regeneration. Under her direction, Marcus applied the treatments. His large hands, more accustomed to violence than healing, moved with surprising gentleness. We placed the biofusion mesh against her wound. Valira couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. "Sorry," he murmured, the apology feeling strange on his tongue. How long had it been since he'd apologized to anyone? "It's necessary," she replied, her voice tight with pain. "The mesh needs to bond with the tissue edges." When the immediate medical treatment was complete, an awkward silence fell between them. Marcus moved to a window, keeping watch over the desolate landscape outside while Valira rested. The distant research facility was still visible on the horizon, occasional flashes of light indicating that the conflict continued. "They'll come looking for us," Marcus said eventually. "Both sides." "Yes," Valira agreed, struggling to sit up straighter. "The insurgents won't give up easily. You're too valuable. And the military." She trailed off, her large eyes troubled. "We'll see you as a traitor," Marcus finished for her. "For helping me escape." She nodded slowly. "Dr. Valira Nax, betrayer of Morith. That's how they'll frame it." A bitter smile crossed her face. "The irony is that everything I've done, including this, has been for Morith." Marcus turned from the window to study her. In the dim light filtering through the dust-covered windows, with her lab coat gone and her composure fractured by pain, she looked different. Smaller, yet somehow stronger in her vulnerability. "Tell me about the blight," he said. "The full truth this time." Valira was silent for a long moment. Her gaze turned inward, as if weighing what to reveal. Finally, she sighed, the sound soft yet heavy with resignation. "The blight began as a bioweapon, as I told you. But what I didn't say was that it was never meant to be used. It was a deterrent developed during our last global conflict. When peace was negotiated, the research was supposed to be destroyed." Her voice grew harder. "It wasn't. A military faction, believing that peace would not last, continued the research in secret. There was an accident, a containment failure. The agent was released." She gestured toward the window, toward the gray sky beyond. "It began by targeting specific genetic variants in our population, but it quickly mutated, affecting our plant life, contaminating our water sources. Morathian physiology is deeply connected to our environment, more so than yours, it seems. As the planet sickened, so did we." Marcus moved closer, drawn by the raw emotion in her voice. "And my DNA? How does that fit into this? Your cellular structure shows remarkable resistance to toxins and radiation. Your body can repair damage that would be fatal to us. If we could understand how, if we could replicate even a fraction of that ability." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw naked hope in her eyes. "We might save millions. At the cost of one monster," Marcus said, but the words lacked their earlier bitterness. "No," Valira shook her head. "That was never my intention. I wanted to study, to understand, not to destroy. But the military, General Mazik, they see only weapons and power. And the insurgents are no better. They oppose the government, but their methods are just as cruel." She attempted to stand, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. Marcus moved to her side instinctively, supporting her with a hand under her elbow. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him. Their faces were close now, closer than they had ever been outside a clinical setting. "For saving my life in the tunnels. You could have left me. You could have left me to the insurgents," he countered. "We're even." A faint smile touched her lips. "I suppose we are." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was prepared to name. Then the distant sound of aircraft broke the silence. Search vessels, cutting through the twilight sky with sweeping beams of light. "They're expanding the search perimeter," Valira said, moving painfully to the window. "We can't stay here long." Marcus joined her, their shoulders almost touching as they watched the search patterns of the aircraft. "We need a plan," he said. "Somewhere to go. Someone who might help us." Valira's expression was troubled. "There are colleagues I trust, scientists who share my concerns about the military's control of research. But reaching them would mean crossing territories controlled by both government forces and insurgents." "Then we rest," Marcus decided. "You need to heal. We'll move when it's safer, under cover of full darkness." As if in agreement, Valira nodded, her body swaying slightly with exhaustion. Marcus guided her back to the makeshift bed they had assembled from salvaged materials in the dormitory. "You should rest," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'll keep watch." Too tired to argue, Valira lay down, her eyes already drifting closed. Marcus returned to the window, his enhanced vision scanning the darkening landscape for threats. Outside, the perpetual twilight of Morith was deepening into true night, the gray sky turning almost black. In the silence, broken only by Valira's steady breathing, Marcus found his thoughts turning to Earth, to the scorched landscapes and desperate fights for survival that had shaped him. He had never expected to find similar desperation on an alien world, nor to feel a growing sense of kinship with one of its inhabitants. As Valira slept, Marcus kept his vigil, a monster from Earth protecting a scientist from Morith. The universe, it seemed, had a strange sense of irony. The surface of Morith was a study in desolation. As Marcus and Valira made their way through the ruins of what had once been an industrial heartland, the evidence of the Blight's devastation was impossible to ignore. Vegetation struggled to survive in the contaminated soil, twisted into strange, sickly formations. The air carried a metallic tang that Marcus could taste at the back of his throat. They had left the dormitory shortly before dawn, using the deepest part of the night as cover for their escape. Valira's wound was still painful, but the biofusion mesh had done its work well enough for her to move with only minimal assistance. "Where exactly are we going?" Marcus asked as they picked their way through the skeletal remains of a collapsed factory. The research facility was now well behind them, but the distant sounds of search vessels still periodically cut through the air. "There's an abandoned atmospheric processing station about 10 kilometers from here," Valira replied, her breath coming in short pants as she navigated the difficult terrain. "It's been offline since the early days of the Blight, but it has emergency power systems that might still function. More importantly, it has communication equipment. And these colleagues of yours, you're sure they can be trusted?" Valira's steps faltered momentarily. "No," she admitted, "but they're the only chance we have. If the military captures us, captures you, they'll extract what they need without concern for your survival. And if the insurgents find us, they'll use you to strike back at the government, regardless of how many innocent people die in the crossfire." Marcus nodded grimly. He understood being caught between opposing forces all too well. On Earth, he had navigated the territories of warlords and resource barons, each claiming to fight for a better future while exploiting those under their control. They continued in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually changed around them, the industrial ruins giving way to a more barren expanse where even the hardiest Morathian vegetation couldn't survive. In the distance, strange formations rose against the horizon, not natural mountains, but massive waste piles from some long-abandoned mining operation. "This area used to be a primary extraction zone for rare minerals," Valira explained, seeing Marcus's gaze fixed on the formations. When the Blight reached this region, the toxicity levels made continued operations impossible. The workers were evacuated. Many of them were already sick. "Your people did this to themselves," Marcus observed, not accusingly, but with a kind of tired recognition. "Just like mine did." "Yes," Valira agreed softly. "For all our technological advancement, for all our supposed evolutionary superiority, we repeated the same mistakes your species made." A bitter laugh escaped Marcus. "Turns out intelligence doesn't guarantee wisdom, no matter what planet you're from." Valira glanced up at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved in a small smile. Perhaps that's something our species have in common. Before Marcus could respond, a low mechanical hum cut through the air. Both of them instantly dropped low, seeking cover behind a ridge of contaminated soil. "Search drone," Valira whispered as a sleek, disc-shaped object glided into view above the wasteland. "Military grade. They're expanding the search grid faster than I anticipated." Marcus watched the drone's methodical movements, analyzing its search pattern. "It's using thermal scanning," he said. "In this wasteland, any heat signature would stand out clearly." Valira's expression tightened with concern. "Morathian body temperature runs cooler than yours. You'll register as a significant anomaly if it scans this area." Without hesitation, Marcus reached for a fist-sized chunk of debris nearby. "Then we give it something else to investigate." With a powerful throw, he sent the object sailing through the air, landing with a clatter nearly 100 meters away. The drone immediately changed course, moving to investigate the disturbance. The moment it was focused away from them, Marcus grabbed Valira's hand. "Run," he hissed, and together they sprinted across the open ground toward a cluster of derelict processing equipment that might offer better concealment. They had almost reached it when Valira stumbled, a gasp of pain escaping her as the sudden movement toward her healing wound. Marcus caught her before she could fall, sweeping her small frame up into his arms without breaking stride. The drone was already turning back toward their position. Marcus pushed his enhanced body to its limits, covering the remaining distance in a burst of speed that would have been impossible for a normal human. They reached the shelter of the equipment just as the drone's scanning beam swept the area they had vacated. Inside the rusted shell of what had once been some kind of filtration system, Marcus gently set Valira down. She was breathing heavily, one hand pressed to her side where a spreading stain of blue indicated that her wound had reopened. "You're bleeding again," he said, his voice low with concern. "It's not serious," she assured him, though her pained expression suggested otherwise. "The mesh is still holding most of the tissue together." From outside their shelter, the hum of the drone grew louder as it circled the area, its sensors attempting to locate the heat signatures it had briefly detected. "It's not leaving," Marcus observed grimly. "It registered something, even if it didn't get a clear scan." Valira's large eyes met his, a silent question in them. Marcus understood immediately. If the drone found them, it would alert the military. They would be surrounded within hours, if not minutes. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the opening they had entered through. "I'll deal with it." "Marcus," Valira called softly, stopping him. "Be careful. Those drones can be equipped with defensive capabilities." He gave her a tight smile. "So am I." Outside, the drone had descended lower, its scanning beam methodically sweeping the cluster of abandoned equipment. Marcus observed its pattern for a moment, timing its movements. Then, gathering his strength, he launched himself upward as the drone passed overhead. His fingers closed around the smooth metal of the drone's casing. Immediately, it attempted evasive maneuvers, spinning and rising sharply. Marcus held on, his enhanced muscles straining against the machine's surprisingly powerful thrust. A compartment on the drone's underside slid open, revealing a small defensive weapon. Marcus twisted his body to avoid the energy bolt it fired, then drove his fist into the drone's sensor array. The impact sent a shock wave through the machine, disrupting its systems. With a final decisive movement, he tore out what appeared to be its central processing unit. The drone went dead in his hands, its weight suddenly inert. Marcus dropped back to the ground with it, quickly disassembling the key components to ensure it couldn't be remotely reactivated. When he returned to their shelter, Valira was watching him with an expression that mingled relief with something like awe. "That was impressive," she said quietly. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with her admiration. On Earth, drones were used to hunt survivors in the wasteland. You either learned to disable them, or you died. He knelt beside her, gently moving her hand away from her wound to assess the damage. "We need to stop again, treat this properly." "No," Valira shook her head firmly. The drone's destruction will be noted. When it fails to report in, they'll send more. We need to reach the processing station before that happens. Marcus frowned, but he recognized the logic in her argument. Then let me carry you. You'll slow us down trying to walk, and you'll make the injury worse. Valira hesitated, pride warring with practicality in her expression. Finally, she nodded. That would be efficient. With careful movements, Marcus lifted her again, cradling her smaller form against his chest. She was surprisingly light, her Morathian physiology less dense than human. As he adjusted his hold, her arm went around his neck for stability, bringing her face close to his. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both acutely aware of the strange intimacy of their position. Valira's large eyes searched his face as if seeing him anew, not as a specimen or a monster, but as something else entirely. Thank you, she said softly. Marcus gave a gruff nod, unwilling or unable to examine the unfamiliar sensations or gratitude awakened in him. Which way? He asked instead. Valira pointed toward a distant ridge that rose against the gray horizon. Beyond those formations, there's a valley on the other side where the processing station is located. Adjusting his grip to ensure her comfort, Marcus began the journey across the wasteland, his enhanced endurance making the burden of carrying her almost negligible. As they traveled, the silence between them was different from before, no longer wary or hostile, but filled with a growing awareness of each other as individuals bound together by circumstances neither could have foreseen. Above them, the perpetual gray sky of Morith seemed to darken further, as if mirroring the challenges that lay ahead. But for perhaps the first time since his arrival on this alien world, Marcus found himself focused not only on survival, but on protection of himself and the fragile being in his arms whose life had become inextricably linked with his own. Night fell over the wastelands of Morith, bringing with it a bitter cold that seeped through clothing and skin to settle in the bones. Marcus, with his enhanced physiology, felt the chill but wasn't significantly affected by it. Valira, however, was trembling slightly in his arms as they finally reached the ridge she had identified earlier. From their elevated position, they could see the valley below. The atmospheric processing station was a massive complex of interconnected structures, its towers and conduits rising like the skeleton of some vast, mechanical creature in the gloom. No lights shone from within. The facility was as dead as the landscape surrounding it. There, Valira said, pointing to a smaller building at the perimeter of the complex. That's the administration center. It would have had independent power systems, communications equipment, and hopefully some heating, Marcus added, feeling her shiver again. Your people don't handle cold well, do I? Valira shook her head. Morathian physiology is adapted for higher ambient temperatures than what the blight has done to our atmosphere. Our circulatory system doesn't conserve heat efficiently. Marcus tightened his hold slightly, instinctively trying to share his body heat with her. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Valira glanced up at him with a mixture of surprise and something softer, more vulnerable. They made their way down into the valley, alert for any signs of surveillance or pursuit. The processing station loomed larger as they approached, its abandoned state both a blessing and a curse. Good for hiding, but potentially challenging for finding functional resources. The administration building was a low, bunker-like structure with few windows, designed to withstand the occasional atmospheric disturbances that had once been common before the blight. Its entrance was sealed by a heavy security door, but the control panel beside it still showed faint signs of power. Valira motioned for Marcus to set her down near the panel. Her fingers moved across its surface with practiced familiarity, inputting a series of codes. When the panel flashed red in denial, she frowned. Security protocols are still active, but the emergency override isn't accepting my clearance. Marcus studied the door, assessing its strength. I could force it. Valira shook her head. That might trigger additional security measures. Let me try something else. She removed a small device from a pocket in her clothing, a research-grade data interface tool that had survived their escape. Connecting it to the panel, she bypassed the standard security protocols, accessing the system at a more fundamental level. After several tense minutes, during which Marcus kept watch over the surrounding area, the panel flashed green and the heavy door slid open with a groan of disuse. Inside, the administration building was a tomb of abandoned technology. Dust covered every surface, and the air was stale, but blessedly warmer than outside. Emergency lighting activated automatically as they entered, casting everything in a dim blue glow. The backup power systems are still functioning, Valira observed with relief. That means the thermal regulation might still work too. Marcus helped her to what appeared to be a control center, a large room filled with monitoring stations and communication equipment. Most of the screens were dark, but a central console still showed signs of life. Valira immediately went to work, her earlier pain seemingly forgotten in the face of technical challenge. Her slender fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease, bringing systems back online one by one. The main power grid is dead, she explained as she worked, but the emergency generators are operational. They've been in low-power standby mode for years. Marcus watched her work, struck by the transformation. The cold, clinical scientist who had overseen his captivity was gone, replaced by someone passionate and determined. In this element, focused on solving problems rather than dissecting them, she was almost beautiful in a way he hadn't allowed himself to notice before. "There," she said finally, as lights flickered on throughout the room and a gentle hum indicated that the thermal systems were activating. "It's not much, but it should keep us from freezing." With the immediate environmental concerns addressed, Valira turned her attention to a medical storage cabinet in the corner of the room. Inside, she found supplies similar to those they had used earlier. Not fresh, but still viable due to the stable storage conditions. "Sit," she instructed Marcus, indicating a chair near the cabinet. "Let me check your injuries." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm Fina. You're the one who's bleeding." "I'll treat myself after," she insisted. "Your regenerative capabilities are remarkable, but that doesn't mean you're invulnerable. Some of those wounds might be infected with blight contaminants that even your system can't easily process." Reluctantly, Marcus complied, allowing her to examine the burns and cuts he had sustained during their escape and subsequent journey. Her touch was clinical but gentle as she applied antiseptic compounds and healing agents to the worst of the injuries. "You're a doctor in more than title," he observed as she worked. A shadow crossed Valira's face. "Before I was assigned to the research facility, I was a medical practitioner. I treated the first wave of blight victims." Her hands stilled momentarily. "That's how I became involved in the research. I saw firsthand what the disease was doing to our people, how it was evolving faster than our treatments." Marcus studied her face, seeing the pain of those memories etched in her expression. "So you became a researcher to find a cure?" "Yes," she said simply. "And when reports came in about an alien being with unprecedented cellular resilience." She met his gaze directly. "I requested assignment to your case specifically." The revelation hung between them, adding another layer to their already complex relationship. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond, whether to feel anger being treated as a means to an end or understanding for a doctor desperate to save her people. Before he could decide, Valira swayed slightly, her exhaustion and injury finally catching up with her. Without thinking, Marcus reached out to steady her, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. "Your turn," he said firmly. "You need treatment and rest." This time, she didn't argue. Under his watchful eye, she applied fresh biofusion mesh to her wound and took a dose of pain suppressant from the medical supplies. The effect was almost immediate. The tight lines of pain around her eyes eased, and some of the grayish tinge faded from her blue skin. With their immediate medical needs addressed, they took stock of their situation. The administration building offered temporary safety and basic necessities, but they were still fugitives in a hostile world. "The communication system," Marcus prompted. "Can you contact these colleagues of yours?" Valira moved to a specialized console, activating it with a series of commands. It's designed for secure, encrypted transmission. If I can get it working, yes. As she worked on establishing a connection, Marcus explored the rest of the facility, ensuring there were no surprises waiting for them. He found what appeared to be living quarters for the administration staff, small, utilitarian rooms with basic amenities. Most importantly, he located blankets and thermal regulation pads that would help Valira withstand the cold. When he returned to the control center, Valira was sitting still, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the supplies he had gathered. "I've established contact, but—" She hesitated. "The situation is worse than we thought. The blight has accelerated its spread. 3 more population centers have been quarantined in the time since we escaped." Marcus absorbed this information silently. "Then, your colleagues. Will they help us?" "They've agreed to meet, but not here. It's too dangerous." She looked up at him, her large eyes filled with a conflict he was beginning to recognize all too well. "Marcus, they want to know your intentions. Whether you're willing to help voluntarily." The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Marcus moved to one of the large observation windows that overlooked the desolate processing facility. In the distance, the gray sky was periodically illuminated by search vessels still hunting for them. "Your military wanted to use me as a weapon," he said finally. "The insurgents wanted the same. What do your colleagues want?" Valira came to stand beside him, her reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass. "They want a cure. They believe your cellular structure holds the key to creating a treatment that could, at minimum, slow the blight's progression. Give us time to heal our world. And what happens to me in this scenario? More labs? More tests?" "No," she said firmly. "That approach has already proven inefficient and cruel." She placed a hesitant hand on his arm, the touch light but unmistakable. "I've gathered enough data to synthesize the key compounds. With your permission for a final genetic sample freely given, we could work with what we have." Marcus turned to look at her, searching her face for deception and finding none. "And why would your colleagues agree to this approach when the military didn't?" "Because they're scientists and doctors first. Because they've seen what happens when we sacrifice our principles for expedience." Her grip on his arm tightened slightly. "And because I'm telling them that's the only way you'll help." The implication was clear. She was taking a stand for him, potentially risking her position and perhaps even her life. It was a gesture that would have been unthinkable days earlier, when he was nothing more than a specimen in her lap. Marcus covered her hand with his own, the touch gentle despite his massive, scarred fingers. "You've changed, Doctor." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Perhaps I'm simply remembering who I was meant to be." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Then, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome appearance, Marcus raised his other hand to touch her face, his fingers tracing the delicate contours of her cheek. Valira's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. In this abandoned outpost on a dying world, 2 beings from vastly different origins found a connection neither had sought nor expected. "I'll help," Marcus said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "Not for Morith, not even for your colleagues, but for you." The admission seemed to startle them both. Valira's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus himself looked surprised at his own words. But he didn't take them back. As if drawn by an invisible force, they moved closer to each other. Valira's smaller form fit against his chest as his arms encircled her in what began as comfort, but quickly became something more. When their lips met, it was tentative at first, an exploration of the unfamiliar. Her skin was cooler than a human's would be, her taste subtly different. But the emotion behind the kiss was universal. Need, comfort, the discovery of connection in a hostile universe. When they separated, a new understanding passed between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The monster from Earth and the doctor from Morith, united by circumstances neither could have imagined and feelings neither had expected to find. Outside, the endless gray twilight of Morith continued, but inside, something bright and unexpected had kindled in the darkness. Dawn broke over Morith, though dawn was a generous term for the slight lightening of the perpetual gray sky. Marcus stood at the observation window, watching as search vessels continued their methodical patterns in the distance. They had not yet expanded their search to include the abandoned processing station, but it was only a matter of time. Behind him, Valira worked at the communication console, finalizing arrangements with her colleagues. The night had brought not only unexpected intimacy between them, but also a clearer plan. Valira's trusted associates, a small group of scientists operating independently from both the military and the insurgents, had arranged a meeting point. They had the equipment needed to synthesize a treatment from Marcus's genetic material, if he truly was willing to provide it. They'll meet us at the old hydroponics research center in Sector 12, Valira announced, rising from the console. It's about 30 kilometers from here, but they can send a transport to a pickup point 15 kilometers away. That still leaves 15 kilometers of wasteland to cross, Marcus observed. With both the military and insurgents hunting us. Valira moved to stand beside him, her smaller hand finding his. The gesture no longer felt strange, but natural, as if they had somehow bypassed years of normal relationship development in their few days of shared danger and revelation. There's an old maintenance transport in the vehicle bay, she said. If it's still operational, it could cover that distance quickly. Marcus nodded, his mind already calculating risks and contingencies, a habit formed during years of survival on Earth. And if we're intercepted before we reach the pickup point? Valira's expression hardened with determination. Then we fight, or run, or hide, whatever it takes. She squeezed his hand. I didn't save you from being a lab specimen only to lose you. Now, the fierce protectiveness in her voice stirred something in Marcus that he had thought long dead, a feeling of being valued, not for his strength or his genetic material, but for himself. It was a dangerous emotion in a dangerous time, but he couldn't bring himself to suppress it. Together, they gathered what supplies they could from the administration building, medical materials, emergency rations designed for Morathian physiology, but potentially usable by Marcus, and weapons from the security office. The latter were old, but functional, energy weapons that Valira showed him how to operate. The vehicle bay was located in a separate structure connected to the main building by a covered walkway. Inside, they found what Valira had hoped for, a maintenance transport, a rugged vehicle designed for traversing the harsh conditions of pre-blight Morith. It was dusty and clearly long and used, but its power cells still retained a charge. Can you operate this? Marcus asked as they examined the vehicle. Valira nodded, already familiarizing herself with the controls. The interface is standard for Morathian vehicles of this era. Basic operation shouldn't be difficult. With the transport secured and their supplies loaded, they prepared for departure. Valira took a final dose of pain suppressants for her wound, which was healing well thanks to the biofusion mesh, but would still be aggravated by travel. As they made final preparations, a notification chimed from the communications console they had left active. Valira hurried to check it, her expression growing grave as she read the incoming message. What is it? Marcus asked, sensing her distress. The blight, she said, her voice tight. It's reached phase 3 progression in the capital city. The containment measures are failing. She looked up at him, her large eyes filled with urgency. We need to move now. If we can reach my colleagues, if we can synthesize a treatment from your genetics, we might save your people. Marcus finished for her. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, not as a burden, but as a choice he was making freely for the first time since arriving on Morith. They left the administration building under the cover of the gray morning, the transport moving swiftly across the wasteland toward their rendezvous point. Valira navigated with confidence, using her knowledge of Morith's terrain to avoid the most contaminated areas and maintain a course that would be difficult for aerial surveillance to track. As they traveled, Marcus found himself studying his companion with new eyes. The cold scientist who had authorized his captivity was gone, replaced by a woman of courage and conviction fighting for her world's survival. The transformation fascinated him, even as he recognized a similar change in himself. The monster from Earth, the survivor who trusted no one, was giving way to someone who had found something worth fighting for beyond mere personal survival. "Tell me more about Earth," Valira said during a brief stop to check their bearings. "Not the destruction, but before. The world your ancestors knew." Marcus was silent for a long moment, sifting through stories passed down through generations, tales told in bunkers and wastelands by those clinging to memories of a world long gone. "They said the oceans were blue," he began slowly. "Not gray or black like they became. Blue and vast, covering most of the planet. And there were forests, trees taller than buildings, stretching for thousands of miles." He closed his eyes, tried to imagine it. The sky was blue too, they said. And at night, you could see stars, thousands of them. Valira listened with rapt attention, as if trying to capture these images in her mind. "Morith was beautiful once too," she said softly. "The twilight hours were famous across our star system. The sky would turn colors no other planet could reproduce, blues and purples and golds all at once. They shared these memories of worlds neither had seen in their true glory, a moment of connection amidst their dangerous journey. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they returned to the transport and continued on, the past giving way to the urgent demands of the present. They had covered nearly 10 kilometers when Valira suddenly slowed the transport, her attention caught by something on the horizon. "What is it?" Marcus asked, instantly alert. "Aircraft," she said grimly. "Military pattern. They're expanding the search grid in this direction." Marcus studied the approaching vessels, his enhanced vision allowing him to make out details Valira couldn't. 5 of them, flying in search formation. "They haven't spotted us yet, but they will if we keep moving." Valira scanned the landscape, looking for cover. The wasteland offered little concealment but ABO.